Top 10 Weird Facts About the Sinking of the Titanic. The sinking of the Titanic in 1912 remains one of the most infamous maritime disasters in history. Despite being considered one of the most technologically advanced ships of its time, the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank, resulting in the deaths of over 1,500 passengers and crew. However, there are many unusual and lesser-known facts surrounding the disaster. Here are the top 10 weird facts about the sinking of the Titanic. Number 10. The Titanic was scheduled to have a total of 3 lifeboat drills before its departure, but only one of them was held, and it was only for the crew members, not the passengers. This was a significant failure in the ship's safety protocol and contributed to the high number of casualties when the ship sunk. Many passengers were not familiar with the location of the lifeboats or how to properly use them, which made it more difficult for them to escape the sinking ship. Additionally, the lifeboats that were available were not filled to capacity, which meant that many people who could have been saved were left on the sinking ship. Number 9. The White Star Line, the owners of the Titanic, was known for its focus on luxury and elegance rather than safety. The company had a reputation for cutting corners and skimping on safety measures in order to save money and increase profits. This was evident in the design and construction of the Titanic, which had too few lifeboats and inadequate safety equipment. The company also failed to heed warnings about the dangers of icebergs in the area where the ship was traveling. These factors contributed to the tragic loss of life when the Titanic sunk in 1912. Number 8. The Titanic was plagued by tragedy from the start, with 8 people who died during the ship's construction. The first recorded death during the construction of the Titanic was that of a man named James Dobbin, who fell into a tank of boiling water. Other deaths during the construction of the Titanic include a man who was crushed by a steam hammer, another who was killed by a falling piece of steel, and yet another who was drowned in the River Lagan. Additionally, the workers were not provided with adequate safety equipment, and there were no safety regulations in place to protect them. The Titanic was also plagued by financial troubles. The ship's construction was plagued by delays, which ultimately led to cost overruns. The White Star Line, the company that owned the Titanic, was forced to take out a loan in order to complete the ship, which further added to the financial troubles. Number 7. At the memorial of Frederick Fleet, one of the lookouts who manned the crow's nest on the Titanic, a pair of binoculars were left with a note reading, "Sorry for bringing these 100 years too late." This was likely a reference to the fact that the binoculars were locked in a cabinet and not accessible to the crew, which may have been a contributing factor in the ship's collision with the iceberg. The lack of binoculars is considered a significant oversight, as they could have potentially helped the crew spot the iceberg in time to avoid the collision. Frederick Fleet, who was one of the 2 lookouts on duty at the time of the collision, was among the survivors of the disaster. He later died in 1965. Number 6. The Titanic's wreckage was not discovered until 1985. The Titanic was a luxurious passenger liner that sunk on April 15, 1912, after hitting an iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean. Despite extensive searches and attempts over the years, the wreckage was not located until 1985. The discovery was made by a team of American oceanographers led by Robert Ballard, who used advanced sonar technology to locate the remains of the ship. The Titanic's wreck site was found to be located at a depth of about 12,500 feet, and the discovery led to a renewed interest in the tragedy and to several expeditions to the site to study the wreckage and recover artifacts. The discovery also helped to shed new light on the sinking of the Titanic and provided a deeper understanding of the events that led to the loss of one of the largest and most famous ocean liners in history. Number 5. The Titanic ship's band played music right until the very end to try and calm passengers, just like in the 1997 movie. The band on board the Titanic, led by Wallace Hartley, is said to have played music until the very end of the ship's sinking in an effort to calm the passengers and keep morale high. According to survivor accounts, the band played a variety of songs, including "Nearer, My God, to Thee," "Autumn," and "Alexander's Ragtime Band." The band's music was heard by many passengers as they waited for rescue, and some survivors later credited the band's music with helping them to remain calm during the disaster. Number 4. Roger Bricku, the Titanic's cello player, wasn't officially declared dead until 2000. Roger Bricku was a cellist in the Titanic's 8-member band, led by Wallace Hartley. When the ship struck an iceberg and began to sink, the band began playing music to try and calm the passengers. They continued to play even as the ship went down, and the band members eventually lost their lives in the disaster. Bricku's body was never found, and for years it was assumed that he had died in the sinking of the Titanic. However, it was not until the year 2000 that Bricku's death was officially confirmed. The fact that Bricku's death was not officially confirmed for 88 years after the disaster highlights the difficulties and uncertainty that surrounded the aftermath of the Titanic sinking. Number 3. There were several design flaws in the Titanic that contributed to its sinking and the loss of life. Some of the key design flaws include: insufficient number of lifeboats. The Titanic was only equipped with 20 lifeboats, which was far less than the number of passengers and crew on board. This meant that many people were unable to find a place in a lifeboat when the ship sank. Lack of watertight compartments. The Titanic was designed with a system of watertight compartments, but these compartments were not high enough to prevent water from flowing over the top and flooding the next compartment. Lack of proper evacuation procedures. The crew of the Titanic was not properly trained to handle an emergency evacuation, and there was confusion and chaos when the ship started to sink. Poorly placed bulkheads. The bulkheads on the Titanic were not placed high enough, which allowed water to overflow and flood multiple compartments. Number 2. The Titanic was equipped with wireless telegraph technology, which allowed the ship to communicate with other ships and coastal stations. During its voyage, the Titanic received several warnings about ice in its path, but these warnings were ignored by the wireless operators on the ship. The reason for this is that the wireless operators were focused on sending and receiving passenger messages and were overwhelmed by the volume of traffic, which made it difficult for them to pay attention to the ice warnings. Additionally, the crew of the Titanic believed that the ship was unsinkable and was not equipped to handle the possibility of an ice strike. As a result, the warnings were not passed on to the captain, and the Titanic continued its voyage at full speed. The failure to respond to the ice warnings is often considered one of the key factors that contributed to the disaster, and serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of heeding warnings and being prepared for unexpected events. And lastly, number 1. In 1898, 14 years before the Titanic tragedy, Morgan Robertson wrote a novel called Futility. The novel tells the story of the largest ship ever built, named the Titan, which is said to be unsinkable, and sets sail on its maiden voyage across the Atlantic. The ship, however, collides with an iceberg and sinks, leading to the deaths of most of the passengers and crew. The eerie similarities between the fictional tale and the real-life sinking of the Titanic have led many to believe that Robertson's novel was a prophecy of the tragic event. The Titan in the novel is said to be 800 feet long, while the Titanic was 882 feet long. The Titan also had a triple screw propulsion system, while the Titanic had a quadruple screw propulsion system. The novel also describes the Titanic's lifeboat capacity as inadequate, which was one of the reasons for the high death toll.